Welcome to the RJLT Economics. In today's podcast, I want to discuss the current situation in Canada. And I want to give my thoughts on what I perceive to be the gravest danger that everyone across the world who loves personal freedom must be really concerned about. And I want to point out the three threats that the actions that Justin Trudeau, this leader of the so-called Liberal Party, has brought to the Canadian citizens, but also to everyone who lives in the so-called quote-unquote liberal democracies, and to a large extent across the world when it comes to the sanctity of private property, personal freedom, and the rule of law. So the situation, I think everyone who has paid any attention to global events know that there has been some protests in Canada against some of the more authoritarian, illogical requirements for medical treatment and for digital proof of medical treatment. Now, first of all, forcing anyone to undertake a medical treatment in itself is illiberal. It is fine, okay? You could say that this is an authoritarian system, and or you could say, okay, we have this so-called quote-unquote liberal democracy, but it's not fully free, right? There are authoritarian elements in it, and the government needs to exert control, so I'm going to force you to undertake certain medical procedures. Against your will, against your freedom, that's fine, right? You can make that argument, and you can force it upon the people. But the reason why there must be a digital proof of said medical procedure, that it must be presented for all public services, that is in itself much more troublesome, much more troubling. And I think that is why the truckers in Canada, who have, I think it was 88 or 89%, very high percent take rate on the said medical treatment, started this protest, right? They do not want to be tracked by a surveillance state all the time, because they are afraid that their personal communications, their personal data, their personal information could be leveraged by unscrupulous players within the group of people who have access to that information, to produce whatever effect that they want to achieve, those foreseeable and those unforeseeable. And so they started the protest. And what we have seen is that since the protest started, the Canadian media played a very interesting trick. In the beginning, they said there was no protest. And then they said there was a protest, but it was unpopular. And then they said, well, it was a protest. Actually, first they said there was no protest. Second, and then they said the protest was not about the mandatory medical treatment or whatever that's related to it. And then they said the protest is small, and then they said the protest is it's not supported by the majority of the Canadians. And then they said, of course, these protesters are racist, fascist, white supremacist, anti-science people, etc. Now, of course, all the narratives above are false. They are false narratives. They're just different ways to make up BS in order to divert attention from the real issue, which is that what the people are protesting peacefully, orderly, are things that warrant discussion on the public forum. But the government, the Canadian government, under the rule of Justin Trudeau, let's call him Justin from now on, right? What a piece of shit. Let's just call him Justin, right? Under Justin, the so-called leader of the Liberal Party, they want to impose something that is very illiberal. And as a result, they don't want to discuss these issues. They want to force an authoritarian rule. And the very fact that there are people who are opposing, who want to protest against these authoritarian rules, gives him the anxiety and forces him to impose a stricter rule in order to basically, in a typical dictator, he needs to basically build up his credibility, that he will use force, that he will be ruthless, and now we see what has happened. This guy, right? This guy, what he did was number one, of course, even though there was all the protest was peaceful, he arrested the protesters, the protest leaders, and then over the weekend, what did they do? They over the last few days, what did they do? They freeze the bank accounts of people who were involved in the protests, and presumably, possibly, the guy is going to look forward to take money from these protesters. Now, so this is authoritarianism at a level that is really hardly imaginable, right? It is, you see, it's understandable if you are a dictator, right? And there are people who are protesting, you don't like them, you imprison the protesters, maybe you beat them up, maybe you beat up their family members, but really to freeze other people's bank account, this is something, in my judgment, that is much more dangerous than imprisoning people who don't support you. If there's a scale of dictatorship, of the authoritarianism, of 0 to 10, this is 10, in my opinion. Why? Because it severely undermines not just personal freedom, but the rule of law and the sanctity of private property. Right? It completely undermines the Canadian financial system. What is Canadian dollar? What do you do when you put your money in a bank in Canada? Well, anytime you criticize Justin, this Justin can take your money, and there is no recourse because, hey, it was never really legal, but you know what? There is no rule of law. This is rule by law. Justin is going to rewrite the law, and this is going to be legal. And this is how dangerous it is. It completely makes Canadian dollar basically even more worthless than it was. Of course, in the past, it was just a piece of paper that the Canadian Central Bank can just print whatever, and the government heavily indebted. You can see that, like all the Western economies, the money is practically overvalued, and it's not something that really you should keep, right? Like some of some big, famous, successful investors have been suggesting in the last few years. Cash is trash. And indeed, the Canadian dollar has always been trash for the last few years, at least, if not longer. But now it is not just trash, it's worthless trash. Because every Canadian dollar that you have can be seized. And seized for no reason other than that the person wants to. The person in charge does not like your view. It doesn't matter what view it is. It may be your view about medical procedure, your view about science. Well, that is enough. If you disagree with this person, it is enough for this person to take your money. And this is really amazing. This is amazing. You know, I can, as I said before, I can understand, right? If you are a dictator, you imprison someone, you kill someone, but you don't undermine your financial system, right? To take this extreme step, to me, this is unbelievable. This is an unbelievable step. It is basically proving to the world that there is no private property in Canada. And this perhaps really goes back to what the famous Professor Schwab of the World Economic Forum said, that basically, you know, everyone you will own nothing and you will be happy. And really, in Canada, nobody owns anything because, hey, if you disagree with Trudeau of Justin is going to seize your asset. And basically, what that means is that you don't own whatever you think you own. You have it under your quote-unquote ownership only under the grace of Justin. So this is number one, private property. The sanctity of private property is gone. And secondly, of course, about freedom. Nobody really ever believed that there was really freedom. Freedom and democracy was really only true when there was when you agree with the person in power. When you don't agree with the person in power, then it's authoritarianism and crackdowns. There's no freedom, right? So you are free to agree with him, but you're not free to disagree. That's whatever that is. And then there is this thing about rule of law. This person, without any provisions in the legal system in Canada, can just do this, can just seize people's property, private property, not because they disagree with the Constitution of the United States of Canada, not because they disagree with any legal provision of Canada, not because they have broken any law in Canada, but only because they disagreed with some policies that are not that could be challenged in the court of law, meaning that, you know, it was just a policy. It was just the policy of this government, not the policy of the Constitution of Canada. Just because of this, the person's property can be seized. That basically means that there is no rule of law. And for Justin Trudeau, this motherfucker, right, when there was protests, violent protests in Hong Kong a few years back, this guy was standing with the protesters. Why? Because he wanted there to be violence in Hong Kong. He wanted there to be violence in Asia. And of course, this sort of person, they want disruption. They wanted destruction in Asia. They wanted destruction in the Middle East, in Africa, in Latin America, in Eastern Europe. But really be damned if just 1/10 of that goes to Canada. No way, no how. And the guy, and you see what is so interesting also is that his deputy, the so-called name that means Freeland, let's call her basically Slaveland. This person was talking about freedom, democracy, rule of law. I think this person talked a lot about the rule of law and freedom and democracy when referring to China and Russia for the last year and a half. I think this person every I would say every month comes out to criticize the other countries, right? And you always say that, you see, we in Canada, we are a country who believes in freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. We cannot tolerate fucking fuck. These motherfuckers, these are what authoritarians look like, right? The real authoritarians are not those people who I mean, the really dangerous authoritarians are not those people who pulls a gun at every opportunity. Those are just fools. The real authoritarians are those who convince people that it is in their best interest to submit their freedom, to submit their rights, legal rights, to submit their property to the leader in order to have certain protection. Right? I think it was I'm not sure if it's Joseph Goebbels or is it Hermann Goering, basically one of the leaders from Nazi era, who said this. Right? It was easy to lead people to war. Right? People don't want war. But if you tell people that it is because there are these dangerous people, they want to harm us, and in order to protect us, in order to protect the legacy of our nation, we must do X, Y, Z. Then it is easy. And it doesn't matter whether we have a democratic system or we have an authoritarian system. As long as we frame the problem in this way, it is possible to lead the people to do whatever. And this is the exact thought process of dangerous authoritarians. And we see that the rise of those bunch of authoritarians in the 1930s, 1940s, from Japan, from Italy, from also Spain and Germany, and a bunch of other places, caused global devastation. And we see that the new breed of authoritarians, or the ones like Justin and Slaveland, these people, if kept unchecked, can lead the world to a much greater destruction. And it's really dangerous. Now, I don't know if the Canadian legal system will be strong enough to resist these authoritarian moves. Maybe if there is God, let's say, maybe the legal system will say, the court will say that what Justin wants to do is unconstitutional and must be rejected, which they are. Then perhaps Canada is not going deep into the autocratic, authoritarian hellhole immediately. But otherwise, once Justin finds out that he has this power and he can do whatever, the next thing that he will impose will not be a simple medical treatment. He can impose whatever. Right? He can impose your forced labor. He can take whatever he wants, and he can start wars. And of course, I don't think he is going to really be the leader in starting a war. But if he sets this good example, his allies in these liberal democracies who are currently in power and who want to start wars in Eastern Europe, in Southeast Asia, and maybe also in the Gulf region, these people will copy the moves of Justin, and they will set up a global authoritarian system, and that will eventually lead to war, and it will not be good for the people. So this is really dangerous, and I just want to point it out. Thanks for listening. I hope you find some points that I'm making in this video in this podcast to be of interest to you, and give me a thumbs up or subscribe if you like to. Thanks. Have a great day.